No, the recording already started, right, everyone? Okay, so thank you so much, everybody, for attending the whole day conference today. And it's so exciting to listen to our wonderful Shooshi. And it's my true honor to introduce her. And this is my first time sharing her session as well, so it's an honor. So Associate Professor Shooshi Dreyfus is a systemic functional linguist. Her research covers a wide range of areas. These include language disorder, language and power, social media text, disciplinary knowledges and academic discourse, disability studies, including family members and carers of people with disability, and different applications and aspects of systemic functional linguistic theory. She the convener with Associate Professor Pauline Jones of the Interdisciplinary Discourse Analysis in Education, Arts and Social Sciences Research Group. And this group focuses on the applications of theories of linguistics and semiotics to a broad range of social issues and objects of study. Its membership comprises an intergenerational group of scholars from across the University of Wollongong and beyond, who meet regularly for a program of seminars, workshops, and student and visiting scholar presentations. Associate Professor Shooshi Dreyfus also started and the convener of the University of Wollongong's Global Changes Funded Disability Research Network. And this network has brought together University of Wollongong scholars researching in disability space and important links between the University of Wollongong, people living with disability, the disability sector, the local culture, and scholars at other institutes. The Disability Research Network hosts seminars at the University of Wollongong on disability-related topics. She also supervises students in many areas where systemic functional linguistic analysis is used as a theoretical framework for the analysis of language, text, and meaning, such as genre and register analysis of textbooks and peer reviews of journal articles, second language development, children with autism spectrum disorder, custom tensile meanings in academic journal articles, support discourse, and multimodal discourse analysis, and more. Such an impressive biography. Thank you so much for joining us, Associate Professor Dreyfus, and now it's over to you.
Thank you, Vin, for that lovely introduction. So I'll get going straight away. So if you would have read my abstract, which I'm sure most of you have, I'm going to be talking about some letters in the disability sector, but actually I'm only going to be talking about one letter because, as all of you would know, once you start analysing something deeply, you end up opening a can of worms, a Pandora's box, whichever metaphor you prefer, and find that it was much more difficult than you imagined and takes much longer. So in this presentation, I'm actually only going to be talking about one letter rather than what I promised in the abstract, and some other changes as well. So I'm going to now introduce the person living with severe intellectual disability that this letter is about. And of course, this is my son, Bodhi. For those of you who don't know me.
Hello, high five. I'm Bodhi.
I'm going to play that again because it doesn't sound like it was very loud. So this is my son, Bodhi, and he is nonverbal and has a severe intellectual disability. He's now 28 years old, and here he is using his communication device to introduce himself to you. I will play it again.
Hello, high five. I'm Bodhi.
So, as I said, my son Bodhi is 28 years old. He lives in supported disability accommodation, which means he no longer lives in our family home, though he did live there till he was nearly 18. And as you would have read from the abstract, it can be quite difficult parenting a child like Bodhi because he's a bit like a 2-year-old. He never stops moving. He never stops communicating, even though he's nonverbal, and he's a really poor sleeper. So it was pretty hard living with him, and the letter relates to that. He has a rare chromosome disorder in terms of what's wrong with him, and that means he's missing a stripe of genes on one of his chromosomes. And the way that manifests is that he has a severe intellectual disability I know it's not very politically correct to say so, but he is a little bit like a 2-year-old. He has quite severe epilepsy, which he needs lots of medications to control. And he has no speech language except for 2 words, mum and dad. And you can imagine how interesting in a way that was to be a linguist as his mother and have a child who does not speak. So what is it? This is the kind of communication he uses. So it very quickly became obvious, and you can see him here as quite a young boy, that he needed to communicate even though he didn't have speech. And we used this program, sorry about that. We use this program called Boardmaker, which has picture symbols like this. And you can see him there pointing to a picture of the steps. He loves walking up and down steps. And if you notice just down here, there's a string. So he has a stack of these on a little key ring attached to his trousers or shorts at all times. And he uses these pictures a lot. And he also uses his communication device. But as you can see from these pictures, they're very experiential in their meaning focus. They are about the what of life. And it's quite difficult for him to distinguish between the different kinds of speech functions he might want to enact with these pictures, whether he's asking something or telling something or demanding something, for example. So I'm going to show you another little video, which is also from when Bodhi was younger, which shows you what it's like to communicate with other people when you can't speak. So in this little video, Bodhi is there with his dad, my partner, and he knows exactly what it is he wants to say about this upcoming set of stairs that he's about to walk on. And so I'll play you this little video and sound. Just let me know if the sound is okay or not, or else maybe let me know afterwards if the sound isn't okay.
More steps. Steps going down. Going down the steps.
So what you can see from this little video clip is that he wants the communication partner to say exactly the thing that he's trying to communicate, which is not that there's more steps, not that there's steps going down, but that he's going down the steps. So it can be really difficult between Bodhi and the communication partner to establish exactly what it is he's trying to communicate. And he will not give up until you get it right. Oops. So now coming back to the letters, why is there only one letter? As I told you, once you start doing the analysis, it can become really complicated. And this is exactly what happened. So for the analysis, I just want to thank Josh Han, who did a lot of the initial analysis of the letter, and also David Rose. Thank you, David, for lots of discussions and emails about the analysis of the letter. So let's go straight to the letter. I'm going to read it to you and point out some meanings along the way. So just to give you a bit of background, given the difficult life we had with Bodhi and given he has a severe intellectual disability, one of the only ways to get a break when you're a family like that is to put your child into what's called a respite house, if there is such a thing in your area. And that is, you can book your child in, they can stay there for the weekend and you can have a weekend off. So this letter is about something that happened and used to happen at this respite house that we used to send our son Bodhi to. So now to the letter. So, dear Minister and others, while it's true that respite is what families caring for a child with a disability often need most, it is actually not just respite, but quality respite that is required. And this is not what we are receiving from DADIC. So respite, as I said, is a house you can send your family member to stay at so you can have a break from caring. And DADIC is the State Department of Aging, Disability and Home Care, which was the department that ran disability services in Australia prior to the current department that runs disability services, which is called the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So DADIC is referred to a couple of times in the letter, and it's also called the department. And then the reason I'm pointing out the minister is I wrote this letter to the minister because in Australia, if you write to a government minister, they are obliged by law to respond to you. And the reason that I wrote and others is because I was writing to the head person in my area and all the people that were above him or her all the way up to the minister. And when you write like this, the minister then pushes back on all those people to find out what's going on, and you know that you're going to get some action. So that is why I wrote to the minister. Our 14-year-old intellectually disabled son was meant to be at respite, at Dapto Respite Unit for this whole weekend, the 11th to the 13th of December, when on Saturday afternoon we received a call from the respite house to say he had been hit in the face with a toy guitar by another client, and on top of being most upset, had suffered a bleeding nose, which was now swelling. With my son not understanding the importance of ice, it was difficult for staff to know what to do. They had rung Casualty, who suggested we pick him up and bring him in. So Casualty refers to a hospital emergency department. When we arrived at the house, we could hear the shrieking of one of the other clients before we even entered the house. And when we entered, we found there were 5 demanding young men and 2 staff members. Staff had divided the house in half in order to separate my son from the one he had had the altercation with. So 2 kids were in one half of the house and 3 in the other. There was little to do in the one half of the house my son was in. And what if one of the clients needed toileting or the like? How would 2 groups of children be supervised by one staff member while the other was off toileting or cooking or washing or whatever else needed doing? In terms of the actual incident, one of the staff reported to me that one of the clients had hold of the plastic guitar, which my son wanted and tried to take. When the client wouldn't give it to him, my son scratched the client, and the client then hit my son in the face with the guitar. I couldn't help wondering that if the staff member was able to report the incident so accurately, she must have been able to see it. And if she was able to see it, why was she unable to do anything to prevent it? Perhaps she was busy with something else. The only conclusion to make, therefore, is that with 5 kids with challenging behaviour, there needs to be more staff. This is not the first time my son has been injured at respite. Last time he was thrown against the wall by a much larger client, at which point he stopped breathing and went blue. He came home with a sore on his back from where he had hit the wall. Other times he has returned with various scratches on his face and body, and my son has also done his fair share of hurting others. As a result of this untenable situation, and not because my son was badly injured this time, his nose had stopped bleeding and he was back to his usual energetic self, I decided to bring him home with us. As such, I am asking for an immediate review of the staff-client ratio when there are kids with challenging behaviour at respite, and I expect your immediate attention on this very serious matter. Otherwise, how on earth are we meant to be able to trust that our children will be adequately cared for when we send them off to respite? It is no respite when one is full of worry about what might happen to them while they are there. In addition to this, I would like to know on what basis the decision is made or was made that a ratio of 2 staff to 5 children was made. Oops, typo. In all other situations and places of care, the staff-client ratio is adjusted depending on the needs of the clients. I do not see this happening at DADC, and I'm left wondering why this is the case. Yours sincerely, Shooshi Dreyfus, postdoctoral fellow, Department of Linguistics. So I was a postdoctoral fellow at the time, just a junior researcher. And this letter was successful in that the staff-client ratio was increased after this. So what are we doing with this letter? We're doing an instance of positive discourse analysis, which is in-depth analysis of instances of discourse that we might model, follow, or appreciate as valued. And this is discourse that functions to make the world a better place. And in this case, we call this empathy activism, which are instances where discourse is used to initiate change out of a feeling of empathy. So the empathy is for intellectually disabled kids at respite in the case of this letter. It's also for ourselves and other parents like us who have to send their kids to respite, but want to be able to trust that the child will be well looked after and safe. And finally, the empathy is also for staff who have to look after these children when there aren't enough staff to properly look after the children. And why are we doing this? Why bother analysing this letter? Well, partly because it was successful. So if this letter was successful in getting government to change something, we need to understand, was there anything in the letter that contributed to that? So we want to understand how the letter was successful, what its linguistic features are, and how it moves through the different stages and phases to achieve its aim of persuading the minister to increase the staff ratio. It's an instance of hortatory exposition, which is a potentially powerful genre, and we need to understand that. And we have analyses in SFL of hortatory expositions at the school level, but not many by adults, and not many that were successful. So where am I situating this paper theoretically? And thank you to Sally for setting us up so beautifully at the start of the day to think about where we are theoretically. So I am using a stratified model of context and language following a Martinian model of SFL, where we think about genre and register as part of the context stratum and discourse semantics, lexicogrammar and phonology and graphology as strata in the language area. So I'm going to begin with genre. That's going to be my starting point. And then I'm going to go down to discourse semantics. I'm going to shunt up and down, which is what we do in SFL. We don't kind of stick somewhere necessarily. When we're doing this kind of textual work, we will go up and down. So then I'm going to go from discourse semantics. I'm going to use appraisal and connection mainly. Of course, we've done other analyses, but this is only 1 hour presentation. And so the main, I guess, critical resources that I'm going to focus on are appraisal and connection. And I'm going to shunt back up to genre. So I'll be moving up and down. And appraisal, of course, is a discourse semantic system in the interpersonal meta function. And connection is a textual system within the discourse semantics that focuses on the way parts of text relate to each other at the level of clause and between clauses in terms of cohesion, which Sally mentioned this morning. We would think about this as conjunctive resources. Okay, so starting with genre, I'm going to distinguish between 2 types of exposition in the persuasive texts family. So the first one, hortatory, as I mentioned, and hortatory expositions persuade someone to do something. In the case of my letter, I'm trying to persuade the minister to do something about the staff ratio. And of course, this contrasts with analytical expositions, which persuade someone to think something. And we know that they are different. So how are they different? And what do we know about hortatory expositions already? Well, we know they've been studied a lot within SFL, but mostly in the school context. So let's just have a look at that. And I don't expect you to read everything on the next 3 slides. So looking from the top down from genre, as in looking at the stages, all these different people, starting back in 1985, right through to 2021, have looked at, in some ways, hortatory expositions. So the interesting thing about them is that all of them agree that there are 3 stages, a beginning stage, a middle stage, and end stage, but they don't always agree on what to call them. So you can just have a look at this. So there's a great variety of what we might call that beginning stage. And the things in brackets are the phases, so the smaller units within the stages. Again, I don't expect you to read it all. In the middle stage, there's a little bit more consistency about what we might call that middle stage. You can see most people do call it arguments. And the third stage, the end stage, has a number of different names, though appeal and reiteration, reinforcement, restatement, other kinds of things we're looking for there. So I'm going to summarize this for you so you don't have to read it all. There are 3 stages in hortatory expositions. The first stage is the thesis or the issue or the position. And what you do there is state the position that you're going to be arguing for in the argument stage, which is where you present the arguments. And then the final stage, which we're calling after Rose, reiteration of thesis, where you repeat the position and ask for change. So what's interesting about this is that Rose argues that the difference between an analytical and a hortatory exposition is the appeal, and that comes in the final stage. It's not a stage on its own. But I am going to distinguish even further in this presentation. At least I'm going to try to. And as I said, there are different phases within these stages. And that's kind of what I'm interested in, is the kind of delicate chunking of this text into phases and subphases and looking at all those layers of meaning. So how are we going to think about these? So Martin says that in order to understand how these texts work, we need to explore the rhetorical and persuasive work done through their reasoning, their personality or subjective reactions, and their metaphor. And the first time he wrote this was before appraisal had kind of been well established. Humphrey also uses the Aristotelian lens of rhetorical features, which are ethos, pathos, and logos, to distinguish. So ethos refers to how a writer or speaker builds authority, respect, and rapport with their audience. Pathos refers to how they use their personal story to build empathy. And logos is how they logically organize their argument. And you will see all three things in operation in this letter, particularly pathos and logos. I'm not so much going to focus on ethos because we're going to run out of time. Okay, so how should we analyze, or how did we analyze these letters? So Humphrey showed that appraisal is useful for understanding how auditory texts unfold through interpersonally oriented phases. And I'm not introducing appraisal because you should all know what that is. And if you don't, you might have been to some presentations today that focused on it, or you can look it up. And likewise, Rose's work on the narrative genre also deploys the appraisal framework to identify delicate story phases. So like I said, I'm interested in phases. So the question then is, for this letter and the other letters, though like I said, I'm only focusing on one in this presentation, the question is, how does this letter make my problem with my son and my respite situation the minister's problem? And that is essentially what you have to do in these letters. You have to make your problem a much bigger problem such that the minister wants to do something about it. And using whatever discursive resources are available across all three rhetorical means of ethos, pathos, and logos. Again, how a writer or speaker builds authority, respect, and rapport with the audience, how a writer or speaker uses their personal story to build empathy, and how a writer or speaker logically organizes their argument. And the answer is complicated. So the letter has a complex mix of resources, obviously, a lot of layering of phases, embedding of other genres, and phases from different genres. So this is actually a first attempt at mapping this complex layering. And I got to say it was really hard. I can't tell you how hard it was to try and really understand all the kind of micro phasing and things that are embedded to do this work of convincing the minister that my problem was worth doing something about and was in fact his problem. So the main linguistic resource I'm going to focus on, as I said, are the discourse semantic resources of appraisal, which will be italicized in the letter and in the analysis that I'm going to show you. And the connection resources will be underlined. And I'm only focusing here on internal resources. So I'm not looking at conjunctive resources everywhere. I'm only looking at the ones that do the work of organizing the argument in the letter. And now I'm going to move on to some very detailed analysis. So I hope you won't fall asleep. All right. So this is the thesis stage. You can see there that the internal conjunctions are underlined, and you can see that the appraisal resources are italicized. And I've read you this, so I'm not going to read you it again, but I'm going to tell you what's happening here. So in this first phase, this first phase is doing so much work. It's only one sentence with a number of clauses and a couple of messages, but it's doing a lot of work here. It pits the families who are positively evaluated, families caring for a child with a disability and what they need, against the department in their role of, it pits the families in their role as carers. So that's kind of afforded judgment positive capacity. And I should have highlighted caring there, or sorry, italicized it. And the department who is negatively judged in not what we're receiving from addicts. So there's this setup happening here with good respite, quality respite, which is what families need, against bad respite, which is not what we're receiving from the department. And notice how in the letter, so the letter has these uppercase just, quality, and not, and this amplifies the meanings using the graduation resources. So there's some emphasis added by me, the writer, at the time. And this is the kind of overall negative prosody that's assigned to respite and the department. So the beginning of the letter sets up this negative prosody against the department. And it's not just one individual family's problem, mine, it's families caring for a child with a disability. So I'm referring out to all families. And this means it's not just about me, it's about other families. And I source this then back to myself. So me and these other families, we need and want quality respite, but we're not getting it. So textually, the resources work across the whole thesis stage. You can see they start up with while, which is a conditional conjunction there. Then there's this adversative but, which is the counter in appraisal engagement terms. And then finalizing the point with an and. So the conjunctive, the connection resources here lead us from not just respite to quality respite, to the department not providing it. And of course, this issue could have been raised with many fewer clauses, many fewer evaluative and textual resources, but it would miss all the nuanced points in the issue. I could have just said, families need quality respite and the department's not providing it, but that wouldn't quite do the work that this thesis stage is doing. And of course, there are other things we could point out, but I'm not talking about them in this presentation. So this is what we call a background phase in Rose's terms. So in that first bit there, I'm giving you the background, you know, what are we talking about here? And then that last bit is the phase of position. So the position that the letter takes is we're not getting quality respite from the department. So that little thesis stage has those two phases, but it also has subphases, because one of the things I worked out in my discussions with both David and Josh was that background and position don't quite capture what's going on there. And they, in a way, background is very ideational, very experiential in nature. But given this is a persuasive text, I wanted to capture more what was going on with these kind of appraisal resources. What is going on here? And I think what's going on here is this bit of the presentation is saying something's not right. Something isn't the case, but it should be the case. And that is what I wanted to capture. So I've labeled these subphases as aspiration. This is what should be happening. This is what families want. And desperation, but this is what we're not getting. So I'm just going to dig into them a bit more closely, because I think this is actually one of the things I think that distinguishes hortatory exposition from analytical exposition. But I haven't done enough analysis to categorically say that yet. So these are new phase labels for hortatory exposition. So aspiration, which refers to some idealized and irrealis thing that we want or aspire to. And in this case, it's quality respite. And this is realized in this case by irrealis affect, what we need most. So there is this sense of the irrealis in that. Then we have desperation, which refers to the fact that the thing we aspire to is the thing we don't have. And we are dispirited by this. And hence we're writing a letter to remedy it. And this is realized in this case by the negative appraisal negation. This is not what we are receiving from DADEC. So I think this captures the more interpersonal nature of what's going on in this hortatory exposition, and perhaps in other hortatory expositions too, which I hope to get to in subsequent research. All right. So the thesis stage with the new subphases looks like this: aspiration and desperation. And the aspiration forming the background, the desperation forming the position, and together they form the thesis stage. Okay, so let's move on to the argument stage. And the function of the argument stage is to present arguments that support the position being put forward. So each argument presents one phase in the arguments stage. So we would label them as argument 1, argument 2, and so on. And Rose argues that argument phases have two subphases: topic and elaboration. So topic, like a topic sentence, it tells us what's coming, which in the case of this letter is a story about an incident. And you can see this is clearly labeled as incident in the text itself. So this is the next bit of the letter, right? The argument stage. It starts with the topic, and then it follows on with an elaboration subphase. And in this case, so the elaboration is the story of the incident that was announced in the topic, and it's an embedded genre, an exemplum. So now the story unfolds of what happened at respite as a stage, as a subphase in an argument phase. So you can see how layered this gets, because this exemplum reports in chronological the orders of the events of concern, and it starts with a setting phase. And like a typical setting phase, it tells us who's involved, our intellectually disabled son, where he was at the dapto respite unit, and when this happened for this whole weekend of 11th to 13th of December. So we clearly get this story setting of who, what, when, where, that starts off this little exemplum. So then the elaboration continues, and I'll take you through it again, story phase by story phase, so you can see the detail. And this took a lot of working out, much easier for David than for me, I have to say. So here's the first problem. So we know that stories often have a problem, and you can see from the negative appraisal, being hit in the face, being most upset, suffered a bleeding nose that was now swelling, that is clearly a problem. And then what happens next is another problem. So my son doesn't understand the importance of ice because he's got an intellectual disability, and you can't put ice on his face. He doesn't like it. And it was difficult for staff to know what to do. So you can see those negative appraisals there, identifying the second problem. And then comes the solution. So the staff had tried to solve this. They had rung Casualty, who suggested we pick him up and bring him in. But then we find another problem, because when we arrived at the house, we can hear this shrieking before we even entered the house. So again, another problem showing us that not all is well in that house. And then we have a fourth problem. We entered and there were 5 demanding young men. But a solution comes because the staff tried to divide the house in half in order to separate my son and the others. And then what happens? We get another problem. There was little to do in one half of the house. There wasn't much to do. That's a problem. Nothing to play with. And more problems. What if one of the clients needed toileting because my son still wears nappies and he needs to be changed? And how would 2 groups of children be supervised? So lots of problems in this incident phase of this text. Interestingly, though, all the negative appraisal is attached to the people with disabilities, but actually they are not the targets. And this links back to the prosody that was set up in the beginning of the text. The department is the target here. So all this appraisal works back to not negatively evaluate the kid who'd been hitting my son in the face, but to evaluate the department. And notice also, not that this is part of the appraisal, there's a lot of passive voice here. Look at problem 1, for example. We received a call. He had been hit in the face. He had suffered a bleeding nose. So the focus here is not on the injurer, the people doing the injuries, it's on the injury itself. And this is part of the way this letter foregrounds and backgrounds things that are negatively appraised and important to talk about. So what happens after the incident? We get a phase from a media genre, an angle phase. Angle presents someone else's point of view on the issue at hand. In the case of this one, it's the staff who's reporting to me what happened. And so this phase we're calling angle because it's what the staff member said. Then what happens after that? We come back to a story phase, a comment. So here I am commenting, me the writer. I couldn't help wondering, shows that this is my comment. So I'm commenting on what happened at the staff, at the respite house with the staff. Okay, and then finally, this section leads to a point. So all this that I've told you culminates in this point subphase, where point is an optional subphase in an argument phase. So the only conclusion to make, therefore, is with 5 kids with challenging behaviour, there needs to be more staff. So you can see the engagement item only shuts down other perspectives on what the conclusion might be. And it's supported by the consequential conjunction, therefore, which links the conclusion to the staff ratio. And this is then driven home by the Irialis affect needs. So it draws on logos with its rational idea of a conclusion rather than pathos or a feeling. So all the stuff before is now concluded with the logical point that's being made. So I tell you this story, I show you what's happening at respite, and the only conclusion to make is that there needs to be more staff. Okay, so if we cluster all that together, look at how many layers there are within this first arguments phase, stage. So you've got arguments. Within one argument phase, you've got a topic and an elaboration, and the elaboration is a story with an incident and finalized with a point, and the story has all these other little sub phases in it. So I think this kind of shows us how complicated what seems at first glance a relatively simple letter is, in terms of the way the kind of structural components line up and the resources that are used to identify these and drive home the point. Okay, let's move on to argument 2, which is much shorter. So like the first argument, the second argument begins with a topic subphase, which identifies what's coming. This is not the first time my son has been injured at respite. So I now tell you, by saying this is not the first time, that I'm going to be talking about some other times. And so then we get the elaboration. Last time he was thrown against the wall by a much larger client. And then we get another example. Other times he is returned with various scratches on his face and body. And then we get a third example. And my son has had his fair share of arguing about this. So I think the third and final example in this subphase shows something particular here. And what it shows is that I don't think my son Bodhi is an angel, and I'm not complaining about kids with disabilities. Rather, the negative appraisal here is, again, about the injuries and the situation, and the passive voice helps us here. He was thrown against the wall. And I've put him in active voice in example 3, because I want to show, or because it's not that I want to show, but it does show that they all hurt each other. My son and all of them, because they're all nonverbal, they've all got intellectual disability, there's not enough staff to supervise them, and they end up hurting each other. So again, the appraisal is towards the department, even though the targets are often the kids themselves. Then this is followed by a solution phase. So this is really interesting, this solution phase, because this is a story phase that typically releases tension. You get these problem solutions in a lot of texts, but in story phases, the problem sets up the thing that needs to be resolved and the solution resolves it. So this solution phase starts with that consequential connection resource as a result. And that actually links back to the story of him having his face hit with the guitar and his nose bleeding. So I'm saying, as a result, he wasn't that injured. I decided to bring him home. But it also links back to all the other examples in untenable situation, the situation being that we can't leave our kids at respite because we can't trust that they're going to be looked after. So in a way, this solution points back to 2 things: the single respite incident that's given in detail, and then the 3 examples that are provided just before it. Okay, so the layers within the second argument phase look like this. We've got only one story phase, the solution, but in the elaboration, we have 3 examples that demonstrate the point. Okay, so then that's the end of the main part of the letter, and we come to the reiteration stage, whose function is to repeat the position and ask for change. So up until this point, I haven't really asked for anything. I've said what needs to happen, but I haven't asked for it. So reiteration stages typically have 2 phases: an appeal, where what is being asked for, and a restatement of position, where the arguments are consolidated. So Rose argues that it's the appeal phase that distinguishes auditory from analytical expositions. So let's have a look, because this text only has an appeal phase. It doesn't reiterate the position. So here's the appeal. As such, I'm asking for an immediate review of the staff-client ratio. I expect your immediate attention. Otherwise, how are we meant to be able to trust? And it is no respite. There's a lot going on in this stage as well. So this is a jam-packed stage, just like the thesis stage at the beginning. So I'm going to unpack it bit by bit. So it starts with a demand. I'm asking for an immediate review of the staff-client ratio. I expect your immediate attention. So that's what I'm demanding. And you can see the appraisal and the graduation highlighted there. That's in the letter itself, the capitalization. This is then followed by the review of arguments. So this review of arguments distills the points made by the stories. It also links back to and expands the point raised in the very first phase of the whole text, the background, about quality respite in the aspiration subphase and the department not providing it in the desperation subphase. So here I'm reviewing what I said at the beginning. We can't trust. So how can we send our kids to respite? That's what we need. We need quality respite. So here's the desperation. It is no respite when one is full of worry about what might happen to them while they're there. Realised by negative appraisal negation, again, no respite, as well as full of worry, negative affect. So the arguments that bookend this text are in the thesis stage, respite, but are not just any respite, quality respite. And then in the reiteration, no respite when one is full of worry. So this is the sandwiching that's happening. And of course, we could be talking about the discourse-semantic system of periodicity here, but I'm not talking about that today. Then following that is another demand. In addition to this, I would like to know on what basis the decision is made or was made that a ratio of 2 staff to 5 children was made. Again, the typo in the letter. So this is kind of a mood metaphor. I'm saying, tell me, but I'm modulating that by saying, I would like to know. Really, I'm saying, tell me. And this has an aspiration. In all other situations and places of care, the staff-client ratio is adjusted depending on the needs of the clients. So this is my Irialis. They're doing that over there. Why can't we have that here? This is what I'm aspiring to, that you adjust it depending on the needs of the clients. And this, of course, is realised by implied Irialis affect. I wish we could have this. Then we get a desperation. I do not see this happening at DADEC, which again is realised by this negative appraisal negation. So we get this pairing of aspiration, desperation at the beginning, and this pairing of aspiration, desperation at the end. So this little reiteration of thesis stage ends with a comment. I'm left wondering why this is the case. So that's the full breakdown of the final stage. So if we look at all the stages, all the phases and subphases in this auditory exposition, we can see them there lined up. And I just think that shows how complicated it can get and the kind of level of detail that we need to drill down into if we are serious in understanding really how texts do their work, which is what I was really trying to do with this letter. I want to understand, how is this text working? Because if I can find a kind of template, how much appraisal is the right amount of appraisal? Where do you need to make your point, and how many points do you need to make, and how many times? What are the particular little things that you need if you want to write a letter to government? Because I can tell you that lots of families need to write letters to government, and it would be great if we could have some sort of recommendations for families who need to write letters like this. So to conclude, this paper has aimed to make visible the way one successful letter to government, an instance of auditory exposition, is structured in layers of genre staging, phasing, subphasing, including an embedded exemplum genre, to achieve its purpose of convincing the government to increase the staff ratio at a local respite house for children with intellectual disabilities. As you can see, the letter has the 3 typical stages that auditory expositions which are described elsewhere have, but we frame the key rhetorical thrust of the first stage as making my problem your problem, which in this case is a lack of quality respite. And the phases or the subphases that distinguish this are this aspiration, desperation pairing, being about what isn't but should be. The second stage, the arguments, builds the argumentation to show exactly how my problem is your problem, and it builds to a concrete solution based on this argumentation in the point that there needs to be more staff. It tells a story, an exemplum, and it provides examples as evidence for this point in the argument. Moving on to the third stage, the reiteration of thesis. The key rhetorical thrust of this third stage is, this is what you have to do to fix this problem now that I've shown you that my problem is your problem. And the interpersonal phases of aspiration and desperation are, as I said, repeated down here, mirroring the pairing in the first stage and kind of bookending them. As I mentioned, we could talk about periodicity, but we're not. So in essence, I'm positing here that hortatory expositions are distinguished from analytical expositions, not only in an appeal phase, but also by these two sub-phases, which relate to the overall social purpose of trying to change something that isn't but should be. And to say that all of this endeavor, this whole endeavor, relies on shared community values about what is right and ethical, and hence it draws heavily on appraisal values, particularly judgment propriety and negative judgment propriety against the department. So that brings me to a conclusion. There are my references, very small to squish them onto the page. And thank you. And please, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Shooshi, for such a powerful presentation. Before we invite the audience to ask questions, may I offer a personal comment here?
Sure.
I really admire you. Yeah, I really admire you because you are not only a great linguist, but also a wonderful mother. So through this presentation, so thank you so much for sharing your stories with us.
Thank you.
Now it's time for question, everyone.
Hi, can I ask a question? Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Professor Liu.
Yeah, thank you, Shooshi, for your enlightening presentation. I believe it is a fine example of research grounded in reality to improve our life. So well, I have to commend it. And my question is concerned with possible variation of this as what you call a hortatory piece, a piece of hortatory exposition. By the way, so can I classify it as a letter of complaint? And as regards the possibility of possible variation of staging, can I, for example, start by directly requesting the Ministry of Education to increase staffing?
Okay.
So
yeah. Thanks for your question. Two questions, I think. So one is, in terms of variation, yes, there is and there will be variation in these letters. I've already started analysing the second letter and I have a third letter as well. And they are a little bit different. They're not all exactly the same. So I think the point will be that there will be variation down at the kind of sub-phase level, but the stage level and the phase level. So if we go back to, just go back to this slide. I think the variation will be less at this level and more at the sub-phase. And if people are putting anecdotes or exemplamins at the story phase level. So that's to answer one thing. There is variation, and I think it will be different. Now, as for whether you start with what it is you're requesting, I think you could do that. But my intuition, as a person who's written these letters a lot, is to tell the story first. And that's really interesting because we know from studies of analytical expositions by people such as Dr. Motoki Sano, a Japanese linguist who now works for Google in Japan. He did a study of the way Japanese expositions work compared to Australian English expositions. And he found, and this is analytical ones, not hortatory though, but still I think it might be relevant. He found that in Australia in English and in the English Western tradition, we tend to state what it is that we're arguing for and then use the arguments to support that. But in Japanese, and we've also found in other East Asian cultures, they tend to not state it up top, but present all the evidence and lead the reader to the conclusion. So if I look back now, I think that's what I was trying to do in this letter, was to say, look at this, listen to this, and now I'm going to tell you what I want, and not to demand what I want straight away. But yeah, look, I will be reporting back in and writing more publications. This one's being under review at the moment, but you know, when I find out more after I analyze more letters. As for whether it can be called a letter of complaint, I'm talking about a systemic functional label of a genre when I say hortatory exposition. And we know from the work done on expositions that there are two types. Ones that persuade people to think something, that's analytical expositions, and ones that persuade people to do something, that's hortatory exposition. So in common sense language, you could possibly call it a letter of complaint. However, letters of complaint may not always ask for change, and that's what distinguishes a hortatory exposition, is it asks for someone to do something. So I don't know whether all complaint letters would do that. So I think that answers that question, and thank you for those questions.
Thanks.
Thank you, Susie, and thanks for the question, Professor Liu.
So Margot's got a question in the chat. What are some of the ethical considerations we researchers would have to bear in mind when conducting positive discourse analysis, especially concerning privacy, consent, and consequences for individuals involved? Really good question, Margot. Thank you so much for that. So of course, to do any research with any human participants, you have to go through a very rigorous ethics process, and you have to go through even more rigorous ethics process if the person has intellectual disability and can't consent themselves. And the ethics committee at my university is really strict about these kinds of things. But if you're analysing your own texts, like I was analysing my own letters, I can give consent for me to analyse and present on my own letters. As for the research on my son, we've been through ethics, and my husband is the person who enables consent for me to talk about him in research presentations. So I don't consent because that's a conflict of interest. My husband consents, and I don't strangle him when he consents. He does it of his own free will. And as you can see, I'm only using it to try and better his life and the lives of other people like him. So it's kind of all okay. But yes, there's a lot of concern in terms of ethics in this context.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that, Shooshi.
No worries, Margot.
Wonderful. Any further questions or comment, everyone? What a fantastic presentations. So we still have 7 minutes left. Feel free to turn your video on, and especially the participant who haven't seen Susie before, and now it's your time to interact with Susie.
Yeah, I'm happy to ask any questions. I guess you can find me on email or wherever.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure everybody knows your emails. But just in case someone doesn't know it, and then we can include it in our email next time. Thank you, Amelia. A lovely comment. Thank you.
Okay, I'll put my email in the chat in case anybody wants it. Not that they will, but you never know. In case you want any of the references. I was hoping that someone might ask a question about phases, or about the kinds of phasing that that we've come up with here, but it doesn't seem like anybody wants to weigh in on that.
We look forward to your publication, Susie, so we can use that as sample text to teach this type of textiles. Yeah, this is great. Any further, everyone? Amelia, please.
Hello, sorry I can't turn my camera on, but I'm a bit in sort of like in transit. So I just wanted to ask, Shooshi, that was a very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it and learned a lot, but I've been wondering, in terms of, this was a great example of a real life situation in which you needed to write a hortatory exposition. But I wondered whether, say, for example, the devices would be different if you're trying to write a hortatory exposition to get people to do something that is not so tied to relationships of power as is the case here, power and responsibility. So, for example, one of the sort of NAPLAN, what are they called? The example questions might be something like, try and convince everyone that they should be doing the same kind of sport or the same kind of activity that you enjoy doing. So do you think that some of the strategies might differ when, you know, we don't have such a clearly delineated sort of power relations and responsibility as you did in that case?
Yeah, thanks, Amelia. I'm sure they would be, because every time you change the context, things change, don't they? But I mean, it would be really interesting to get a look at if NAPLAN did a hortatory exposition question rather than an analytical exposition question. It would be really interesting to get a look at some of the high scoring ones and see what it is they value in those texts.
Yeah, because I think probably the differences would come at the level of phases and subphases rather than the broader stages. So
that's right. Which is why I think this work is really interesting, in the sense that everybody can teach, you need a thesis and arguments and a reiteration. You need to tell them what's coming, argue for it, and then tell them what you did, or whatever, you know, however you're going to frame that. And people can even go down to the phase level. But actually, the work is really in the subphase, and if you've got a story, in the story phases, how you do that work, how those things realize the phases, and how those things realize the stages. So I think it's kind of not enough. And I guess what I like about coming from the top down, so I feel like while I did do shunting, I kind of came from the top down. I came in through genre. Okay, how do we divide the text up into its stages? What are the phases? What are the subphases? And what are the critical language resources that realize these? And what I like about this is you don't have to teach everything. So let's say we were going to teach this. We wouldn't have to teach all about transitivity, teach all about this, teach all about that. We could go, no, we're not going to teach that. We're actually going to go, you need 3 stages. In your thesis stage, you need these 2 bits. You need an aspiration and a dispiration. Let's say this was the template. You need to say what is not happening and what should be happening. And so if you can get down to this level, you can actually, I think, teach from the top down and then finesse the sort of language features later, rather than start at the language features and work back up. I think this is a much better way in. And actually, this is the way David Rose comes in with Reading to Learn with teachers. You come from the top down, working out what's going on, and then getting to the language features, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that would work a lot better than some of the sort of rules of thumb and strategies that they have, or some teachers would have in their, I suppose, repertoire, like, use statistics, use this, use that, which doesn't get anywhere near what is actually the purpose of, the text.
Yeah, because I think you need to be thinking, what is the purpose of this? What is the function and purpose of this bit? It's like you've got a little gremlin sitting on your shoulder going, what am I doing now? Okay, if I'm in aspiration, I'm telling them what I want. If I'm in dispiration, I'm telling them what's wrong. Okay, what am I doing in topic? I'm going to tell them what I'm going to be talking about. And now I'm going to tell them a story. And the story should go through these, you know what I mean? So you get it, you get to it like that. And I think, So, yeah, I mean, Sally Humphrey did a lot of work on expository text, not just this type, in adolescent work in her thesis, which is worth looking at as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone. And another question from Lucy in the chat box, Lucy.
Oh, okay. I'll have a look.
Susie.
Hello, Lucy.
Hello.
Oh, am I saying the story phases are subphases? Oh, I think what I'm saying is, I think what I'm saying, look, I don't know the answer to that. And I think in terms of like stratum, it starts to get straighter, it starts to get slippery, doesn't it, in terms of where we are on that boundary between genre and register and so on. I think what I'm saying is, no, I don't think I'm saying they're subphases. I think, see how I've got exemplum in embedded brackets? I mean, I've got them in single embeddings, but I've used square brackets there because I think what I'm saying here is that there's an embedded exemplum, and in that there are story phases. So they're embedded in the exemplum. I wouldn't then call them subphases because they're part of an embedded genre, which is sitting in the elaboration. But I don't know if that answers your question. But that's kind of how I see it.
That was my next comment was, or are they embedded? And yeah, probably in terms of a rank scale and having some clarity there, sounds like embedded makes sense to me.
Yeah. Thanks.
Otherwise, you're getting all tangled with constituency.
That's right. And that's what starts to get tricky, doesn't it? And then you start to get down to the level of message and below, and you're thinking, well, where's my boundary here? I don't, and these are the kind of theoretical thorny problems that you end up mucking around with, don't you?
Yeah, and I think, even if we are deliberately going across borders, there is something to be careful about rank scale mixing. What does that thread of constituency, where are we located? I can see why.
So do you think this works then, or not quite because of that?
Well, no, I think by not going into sub phases, because then you're kind of having a further constituent, a lower level unit, I think that might get really messy. I can see that the logic in going, okay, in this sub phase, there's some embedding going on. I think there's clarity there from my first take.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Shooshi, and everyone for your contributing idea and discussion. If you don't have any further question, and let's say thank you again to Shooshi and everybody. It's really great to see so many familiar names during the day, and it has been fantastic so far. Lucy, David, Marco, Erica, and a lot of other names, Emilia, a lot of names. So thank you so much, everyone, and please stay for the book launch for the first time for the athlete. And I can see Vaughan, Valerie Hall is ready there. She is the marketing manager at Equinox, and she's going to introduce to you a number of fantastic books. So please stay with us if you can. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Thank you, Shooshi. Get the recording is still on, so I'm going to share the screen now. Hi everyone, this is just an overview of the book launch session today. It will take 45 minutes. Myself, I will talk for 5 minutes, but I might not use all the time here because the books are already released earlier this year. So it's just a chance for me to say thank you to everyone and highlight some statistics in it was released 7 months ago, sorry. And Tahan is going to introduce his recently published book in August. And we have a great pleasure to introduce Valerie Horn, marketing manager at Equinox. She's ready here with us. Welcome, Valerie Horn. So now, yeah, as you already know, we released this book earlier this year. Actually, it's a conference proceeding from the first International Online Systemic Functional Linguistic English Conference in 2021. And it includes 19 papers delivered at the conference 2 years ago. And since it was released in April, it had attracted over 2,400 downloads from over 80 countries within 7 months. So I had two pictures here that show two different research management platforms at my university. So previously we use WOP, so that platform ended in by the end of May. So the statistics that show this number were over $1,000, and these numbers winner of the first conference, obviously Sally Humphrey and committee member Thomas to edit this book. So I will show you briefly the book that I'm sure many of you already download, but just in case you haven't. So this is the book, some of the first pages of the book. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank a number of contributors, especially the authors who already who contributed to this collection, and then the organizing committee member of the first conference. And this is a great outcome for the English group, and it's a credit to everybody because it's open access. So and under the Creative Commons license. So the purpose of it is to enable citation. So although it's a...
Sorry, are you sharing the screen right now?
Yeah, I'm sharing it.
We can't see it.
Oh, sorry, just so Oh my God.
Yeah, I thought you were just like introducing the whole thing.
Oh no,
That's all right.
I share different screens. Oh, sorry. Okay, I had 3 screens, so that's why sometimes okay, sorry everyone. So I thought it's already shared. Okay, so yes, the number. I just show you this number. Okay, just 2 slides from me for today, just 5 minutes from me, and then 10 minutes for Ta to introduce his book, and then 30 minutes for her to introduce a number of fantastic books as well. So I just show you some numbers that I just mentioned to management platform at UTAS, and the total number is over $2,400 from IT country within 7 months. And then I just show the book here briefly is available under Creative Commons license, so it's enabled citation for the authors and the editors. So it's really great to do that. So just I think for this session, it's such the good opportunity to say for me to say thanks in the spoken form to everybody who has been supporting Assoc and particularly the first conference. And it's a great outcome for the first international conference, and you can see the list of conference abstract reviewers, full paper reviewers, so and copy editor, and the list of 19 papers selected for this proceeding. So I think that's all from me to introduce this book to you at this second conference, as we reflected on what happened at the first conference and what's the outcome. And just a quick note that the special issue will be released by the end of this month or early next month. That includes 4 papers from the first conference as well. So I think that's all from me. Thank you, everyone. And now it's time for Tai to introduce his book. Tai.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Vinh. Can I share my screen?
Sure. I just stopped sharing.
Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen here?
No, not yet. Yet we can see it now, Tai.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Vinh, and thank you everyone for joining this launching of my first book and my newly published book. This is actually the products of my PhD thesis, and thanks to the support of Dr. Vinh and Dr. Angela after the completion of my thesis, and we worked together in 1 year to revise, to convert the thesis into the book, and published by the Cambridge Scholar Publishing. And the book is of interest for those who are working with Vietnamese culture in English education, in systemic functional linguistic modality, in children's literature, Asian literacy, or Asian literature, and the philosophies of East Asian countries. And the book is aimed to provide a comprehensive study of Vietnamese culture as represented in Vietnamese picture books. And the focus of the book is on examining the representation of cultural aspects, and by using various methods to explore with both the Western semiotic framework and East Asian theories for interpreting, analyzing the visual meanings of the images in Vietnamese picture book. And we also aim to work with Vietnamese artists, perspectives on their way to represent Vietnamese culture in their artwork. And through this, we have developed an analytical framework specifically for Vietnamese images and Vietnamese culture, but the framework can be flexibly adapted to many other cultures, especially for East Asian culture when working with images. And the structure of the book, we have 7 chapters, but the first chapter is the introduction, and the second chapter we work with the application of Western semiotic frameworks in interpreting, analyzing visual meanings of images in Vietnamese picture books. And this chapter was published as in the proceeding of the peer review proceeding of the international conference in Vietnam, and the chapter number 3, we discussed the importance of the East Asian philosophical concepts for interpreting non-Western images, especially in Vietnamese picture books. And then we developed a framework for analyzing the images in Vietnamese picture books. And this chapter actually was originally published in a book chapter by IGI Level. And the chapter number 4, we highlight the significance. We continue to work on the usefulness of the framework of the, and then this chapter was published in a very good handbook. It's just nearly indexed in Scopus. And the chapter number 5, we work with the Vietnamese artists on their way to represent Vietnamese cultural aspect in their work, and with the focus on the very famous, very well-known concept of East Asian culture, the yin-yang balancings. And we gained the very interesting insight into the professional of the artist. And this chapter was originally published in a good journal, a Q1 journal. And chapter number 6, we propose our byproduct framework to explore the East Asian culture in images about Vietnamese culture. And this chapter was published in the proceeding of the first conference, like in the book that Dr. Win just mentioned earlier. And chapter 7 is the summary of the chapter 2 to chapter 6. And then we just acknowledge the contribution of our book to the field, the strength and the greatness of the book. And these are some, as you can see, some selected images and many others, but I can not list all of them here, but they are all about the Vietnamese culture in various picture books. And we analyze these images with the framework from Western culture and the framework that we developed based on East Asian culture, and with various interesting findings. And the main findings of the chapter 2 is that the Western semiotics framework can be applied to understand the basic laser meanings for example, the ideational, interpersonal, and textual meanings of the illustration of Vietnamese picture books. However, we further explore the cultural aspects, and there are some limited when using the Western semiotic framework. And then when we apply with the East Asian philosophy concepts and some conflicts when using Western semiotic frameworks were resolved in this chapter. And chapter 4, we continue to validate, to confirm the usefulness of this framework, and we provide some specific guideline for working with teaching intercultural understanding in multilingual classroom. And chapter 5, we also work on East Asian philosophy to make it more complex with the framework. And then in chapter 6, we have a full framework of our book. And this framework is look like this. And we have 2 parts of the framework, the visual and invisual part of the framework. And you can see we can apply in various contexts, especially for East Asian culture to understand the connotational meaning of the images. And this book can be found on the website of the Cambridge Scholar. And it's our hope that this will not only contribute to the promotion of intercultural understanding, to the teaching of Asian literacy, but we can also enhance the appreciation of Vietnamese culture, and we gain positive intercultural communication between Vietnamese and non-Vietnamese communities, and contributing to the values of respect, equality, and love, so that we can live in harmony. And thank you very much again, Dr. Vin and Dr. Angela, for your endless support for me to complete my books. And thank you, everyone. That's it from the introduction of my book. And I am happy to share with you any further questions relating to this book. Yes.
Thank you so much, Stein, for the acknowledgement and for introducing your fantastic book with us. We must say, Angela and I said, we are so lucky to have PhD student like you. I think you can work, on this book on by your, because you already published with us a lot, and we already with you on this journey. But I think as Angela said, no PhD student invited their supervisor to be a co-author on a book from the PhD. And at the beginning, we were hesitated to say yes. We said no, and you just hesitated because you acknowledge our contribution, and you are. We must say you are so generous. You're so generous. Thank you very much. So the next part. Any questions, everyone, about the first two books before we invite Von Laurie Holmes to introduce a range of essay books recently published. Okay, so that's right. So over to you, Valho.
Thank you so much. For those who don't know me, I'm Valerie Hall. I'm from Equinox Publishing, and we're an independent academic publisher. We're based in Sheffield in the UK, and we publish books and journals in the humanities. And linguistics is one of our bigger subjects. It's probably the second largest subject after religious studies that we publish. And within linguistics, we publish in a range of different subject areas, but definitely systemic functional linguistics is one of the main subject areas we publish in. So today I'm just going to go through some recent publishing in systemic functional linguistics, looking back maybe 2 years ago, because I think we've missed a few conferences during the pandemic, and maybe people are not so aware of the more recent books, and then the books that we've published this year. In fact, we published 2 books in the last week or so, and then kind of looking forward to the next few months to see what's coming. And we tend to publish books within series. About 80% of what we publish is in a series, one series or the other. So I've kind of organized it by series. So I hope that all makes sense. And it's fairly old school, no screen sharing. I've actually got the physical books with me, so I'm going to show them to you. The first series I'm going to talk about is the collected works of Christian Matheson. And this is the first volume we published in the series. It's Systemic Functional Linguistics Part 1. This was published in 2001. And the series is going to consist of 8 volumes. And each of the volumes has sort of collected papers, most of which were previously published over the last 40 years. But each volume also has one paper which is newly written for the volume, and each volume has a foreword. In the case of this first volume, the foreword is written by Eric Steiner, and we've got the second volume for this series that's come in. It probably will be published during the second half of next year, and that has a foreword written by David Butt, and it's got some original papers as well. This series sort of follows another series we've got, which is the collected papers of Ruqaiya Hassan, and that has a 7-volume series, 5 of which have been published. So that's kind of the model for that one. So look out for that second volume in the series. The next series I want to talk about is called Key Concepts in Systemic Functional Linguistics. And this is edited by Gerard O'Grady, Rebecca Wegener, and Tom Bartlett. And these are fairly short books. They're about 60,000 words each. And they're each as a sort of treatment of a core subject within systemic functional linguistics. And it's a very active series. We've published 3 books. We've got 2 coming very shortly, and there are 10 others contracted. And the series editors are, bringing more books into the series as you know, as they come. So it's going to be quite a big series in the end. So we published 3 books in 2021. This one is Neo-Firthian Approaches to Linguistic Typology by Bill McGregor. They've all got kind of similar designs. This is the volume on verbal art by Donna Miller. And this is the Systemic Functional Translation Studies by Bo Wang and Yunyi Ma. So those are the 3 we've got so far. We've got 2 more coming fairly soon. There's one by Christian Matheson, which is on system in systemic functional linguistics, and that should be published probably next month or January. We'll see. We've got a bit of a rush on trying to get everything through this year published. And then we've got one publishing in April, which is by Paul Tench, and that is word phonology in a systemic functional linguistic framework. And that is phonological studies in English, German, Welsh, and Tara, which is a language from Nigeria. So look out for those. And then sometimes we do publish books that aren't in a series. This is another one we published in 2001. This is the conference papers from the International Systemic Functional Linguistics Conference that was held in Boston College in 2018. And it's edited by Maria Brisk and Mary Schlepper-Grell. And it really brings research from sort of primary, secondary, higher education and the relevance to systemic functional linguistics. Okay, so then we're getting into kind of the books that we're publishing this year. So it's some years we don't publish much, and other years we publish quite a lot. So it just depends on how they come in. So this is one we published earlier this year. This is quite an interesting book by Teresa Otesia, and it's in a series called Text and Social Context, which is edited by Alison Moore, Rebecca Wegner, and Tom Bartlett. And this series looks at in-depth accounts of language used in social life. This book is about memory practices and their construction in the pedagogical discourse of the traumatic recent history of Chile. So it gives a detailed analysis of how the painful recent history in Chile is recontextualized and negotiated into secondary level Chilean history education. In the same series, we've got a book by Jenny Fest that's coming out fairly soon, and that is called News Across 5 Continents. That's newspaper language in the context of regional and functional variation. And it presents a thorough analysis of newspaper language from a regional and functional perspective. So that should come out in the next couple of months, I would say. And then we have 2 other books in that series that are contracted. They haven't come in yet, but hopefully soon. They're by Maria Freddy and Alison Moore. So you can find out more about any of the forthcoming books on the website. Everything that's pretty much contracted is on the website under the series name. Then we've got another really interesting book, which we've just published in the last couple of months. And I don't know if David is here and he wants to say something about this book, but it's Reading to Learn, Reading the World, How Genre-Based Literary Pedagogy is Democratizing Education It's edited by David Rose, Claire Acevedo, and Rachel Whitaker. And there's a foreword by Jim Martin. And it showcases a range of reading to learn projects from around the world in a variety of educational settings and languages. And some of the countries included in this volume are Australia, South Africa, Sweden, Spain, Portugal, Argentina, the US, the Caribbean, Denmark, Chile, and Indonesia. So I don't know if there might be some authors here in this group or contributors to some of these books. So if you want to chime in and give a little bit more detail about any of these books, you know, that would be great. And then we've had 2 books published in the last week or so, which are so new I haven't actually got a copy of them. But one is called Social Practices in Higher Education, a knowledge framework approach to linguistic research and teaching, and that's edited by Tammy Slater. And the book addresses Mohan's concept of social practice, an educational activity that can be considered as action in a frame of meaning or a knowledge framework. The knowledge framework, grounded in systemic functional linguistics, is a heuristic that provides both a theoretical framework for researching the language of social practices and a springboard for organizing lessons that can help teachers bring explicit language development into content teaching. The volume brings together the latest research on using Mohan's SFL-based theory at institutions of higher learning. And finally, the other book we published in the last week is called The Language Dynamic, and that's by Gerard O'Grady and Tom Bartlett. And that identifies a number of mechanisms that enable the meaning potential of language, from the phoneme through grammar and discourse and on to ideological systems. It underpins functional theories of language with concepts from biological and cultural evolution, social semiotics, and systems theory. So that kind of brings us up to date with the publishing recently and coming up a little bit into the future. The only other thing is we do have a journal, Language in the Human Sciences, which it would be great if anyone who has a contribution for that would consider publishing it in the journal. All the information about submissions are on the website, subscription information and so on. And the other thing we've got, which we probably don't publicize enough, is we've got a special package of systemic functional linguistics books. It's an ebook package, and it involves all of the systemic functional linguistics books we published, plus any of the new ones in ebook form, plus a subscription to the journal. And I can't remember the exact details, but it's a huge discount, like 70% or something over the actual price of these things. So if anybody's interested in that, just get in touch with me and I can give you all the details. And there's a question. Is it possible to get linguistics and the human sciences ranked as a journal? I will have to ask about that. I'm sort of not involved in that side so much, but I'll ask Janet about that.
Yeah, I'm sorry to be asking that question, Val.
It's all right.
Hello. Just that, you know, the horrible reality of metrics in universities these days means that a journal is more likely to get submissions if it's ranked and has this index and blah, 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 blah. So I don't know whether if there's anything we can do to help that happen, yeah, maybe let us know or something.
Yeah, I know, I totally understand. It does come up, you know, this issue does come up, and I do understand. So I will take it up with Janet. Are there any other questions or comments, or any authors that want to give their 2 cents?
Thank you so much, well, for introducing a number of fantastic books which have been recently published. And maybe David here, would you like to say anything about your book? Or would you like to add anything else?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to sort of introduce the books. That's great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And we love seeing your emails to the SFL forum, this link. Every time a book got published and you share the new with us, that's fantastic. And thank you for all the, I'm not sure you are the person who in charge of social media or anyone else, but we love seeing the Twitter post there, and you touch in this group and link in all of the publication by Equinox, so that's great. Yeah, it is really wonderful to see what's out there, and so we can keep up with the development of the field. So thank you very much for all your hard work. Well,
thank you.
Okay, if anybody don't have any questions, and then if you don't have any question, and then
Vin, there is one question from
just
who asked for in the chat, but I think it might be for Val.
Okay. Yeah, while I was talking, there was a question in the chat. Shooshi, a question from you. Is it possible to get linguistics in the human science rank?
No, not my question. The next one.
The next one.
Is about the Journal of Ethiopian Studies. Is there any financial support that could help me to enhance the quality and visibility of my journal?
Okay.
I'm not sure about that. I don't think that's an area we publish in. Yeah, I'm not sure what the funding bodies for that would be, or the sources of finance, potential sources.
It's a very specific area, and maybe that's related to culture studies or cultural study or languages. Yeah, you might need to investigate a bit further.
There probably are some funding sources, but yeah, I don't know what they are.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. Any further question, everyone? No, that's totally fine. It's all good. It's a fantastic day so far, and I'm sure everybody needs a break now. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time, and enjoy your evening or morning. I'm not sure. Maybe it's early morning in somewhere in the whole world, and now it's the evening time for Aussie people. And Ron, enjoy your day. It's just the starting of your day. Enjoy your afternoon, and everybody enjoy your evening or any time at your place, and see you again tomorrow Aussie time at 9 a.m. everyone. Thank you so much, and see you again soon.